Hello, everyone. My name is Dennis, and thank you so much for joining and taking time with us today. We're here to talk about ChatGPT and how to use it securely. We are brought here today and sponsored by Atmosera. Atmosera is dedicated to providing transformation services for businesses in order to make the most out of their cloud investments and their investments in people. We specialize in all of the technology involved in modernizing a company using cloud services, and in particular Azure. My name is Dennis Glendenning. I'm a principal security architect with Atmosera, and I'm joined today by Rachel, who has brought us together. Thank you for that, Rachel. We are going to discuss how to use ChatGPT and generative AI chats securely. We're going to do that in a couple of different contexts, at home and at work, and explore kind of the connection between that and the common themes. Starting off, going back on the Wayback Machine, so to speak, back in 2017, Microsoft released a personal digital assistant. They integrated Cortana into basically a Bluetooth speaker and provided sort of a very interesting business-focused version of Alexa or Siri, connecting with your work calendar, giving you a kind of blended experience across home and work. Fast forward to today, right? ChatGPT is something altogether different and can actually provide a very robust and context-free sort of experience. Now, if you have any experience with ChatGPT, and we're certainly interested in hearing from you as far as what your experiences would be. In fact, if you don't mind going into the chat service here in this session, and just go ahead and let us know if you've either not experienced it, but you've read about it, or whether you've actually practiced with some prompts, maybe in the Bing side of things, or the OpenAI. We would be very interested in hearing about that. You have, then you probably know what it can do for you. And just very briefly, I'll just say that it's very important to keep things in context when it comes to the service. It is certainly a wonderful experience, right, to be had, but there's a lot of hype around it. Right? So it means something to us today, but we really don't know what that is. I can say that the implications from a security point of view are just evolving. We're just beginning to know about it. Now, you can find all sorts of information using the portal, right? Using the chat interface, right? But you can also share a lot of information that you probably normally wouldn't. Right? When we go to a search engine, I know I do, I go and I look up things expecting a certain level of privacy, expecting a certain level of simplicity in the technology that I'm dealing with. I wouldn't be expecting an intelligence behind those search engines or those searches that I submit, and sophisticated analysis that's maybe contextual based, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we're all aware of the analytics that companies provide and execute when we're there, but this is something different, right? This is AI. This isn't machine learning. It's a more robust sort of experience. So there's certainly lots to be had in that kind of dialogue, and it can very much change the nature of education. It can certainly help us in our volunteer activities and help us present ourselves much better, much faster in all manner of personal activities. And if you're interested in learning about, say, financial options for your retirement fund, you can get into ChatGPT or the Bing chat and explore those sorts of things. You can certainly learn a whole bunch more about healthcare and actually get a little bit more kind of contextual support around diagnosis, self-diagnosis, than what you would do with WebMD, for example. And if you want to get some code written, you can certainly ask for stubs or for entire applications, right, depending on what your needs. You can do all of that, and it's a wonderful accelerator, to be sure. Unlike Cortana and Cortana devices from 2017, we really are dealing with an AI. Right? And professionally, of course, you get all of that, right, and a little bit more. because you can use it to do presentations, to develop content, to support kind of financial calculations, and to really inject kind of intelligence into your day-to-day work stream. Right? But all of this comes at a bit of a cost. Now, if you look at the privacy policy, you'd see a typical kind of policy that OpenAI provides. And there are some challenging things, some things I think you should be concerned about there. But none of these things are showstoppers. I don't think it's all that much different than, say, the user agreement for Bing itself, without ChatGPT involved, without the Bing chat involved. Right? But there are some misunderstandings about how the data might end up being used in the future. Some that are concerned about what they put into the chat interface being kept and recorded. And if you're asking questions about, say, a personal medical condition, you may not want that stored in someone else's server. You might want that to be anonymous. In certain cases, it actually will be, right? But the company or the place where it's stored has lots of controls, although you do need to be aware that now that company does have that information, right? OpenAI, if you're using that interface, or Bing and Microsoft, if you're using that interface. So there's three things that I pulled out of the policy that I thought you should know about. One is how personal information is used. There are a number of folks, say, on the broader internet, who are of the impression, right, that the chat experience will not persist, that none of the information that you share, either at work or at home, will be recorded. But actually, according to their policy, they do use content to provide improvements, right, to analyze in the future and to improve the service going on, right? And the real rub here is, will they use your information to train the future products? Because if they do that, and you share some private information about your family, about yourself, then how will that work, right? How will that information be protected in the future if they're using it to train the future editions of the AI? That's an open question, right? We don't know what the future is going to be like. So you should be aware that anything that you do share may end up in some form in a future version of the AI, right? So we just don't know, but we do need to be very mindful about that, right? The second thing to bring out is about the disclosure of personal information here. Certain circumstances, they may provide your personal information to third parties. Now, the way that works is essentially there's an ecosystem of companies behind OpenAI, as there are an ecosystem of companies that support Microsoft, vendors, contractors, etc. And in the pursuit of their jobs in keeping the servers online and providing security and protecting things, these third party to OpenAI and third party to Microsoft, will have to see this information. So it's not just OpenAI, but it's all of the contractors. And it's also not just OpenAI and those contractors today, but it's the folks that may be hired in the future. And in fact, we know about the transaction where OpenAI was bought by Microsoft. So it may not be OpenAI and Microsoft who run the show 20 years from now. That business unit may be run by someone else. Not that your data would persist for 20 years, I doubt that, right? But something to be aware of, that your personal information is distributed. Just from a business point of view, it's protected, but it is distributed. And then last, around retention, you can see that for research and statistical purposes, right, that they are anonymizing, de-identifying your information. But the trick is that we're talking about AI. You can use AI to re-identify. So although they promise not to, and I believe them, right, someone else in the future may actually try to de-identify your personal information. So those are some of the risks, right? And you can see that they're very transparent about what their intentions are. And again, I don't think this is a scary thing or something that should dissuade you from using it, but I do think it just means that you should be careful about that. Okay, so and just to summarize kind of the posture that you're looking at, the risk profile that you're looking at when you use it, right? As I mentioned, it's not a search engine. It can understand or fill in the gaps more so than a search engine can. So when you share a little, you're actually sharing a lot. And just like Facebook or Instagram, other social media companies, it will connect, and they do say that they are connecting the dots between what you're sharing in their portal and what they're collecting from other vendors like Facebook and Instagram. So they're able to build a profile, and using AI, they'll end up making broader kind of assumptions than what a simple search engine would do, right? So you give a little, you're actually giving more in this case. Now, the number one challenge with using this for personal use right now is in schools. That's my impression, right? Because a student using this is kind of circumventing a number of different intentions, right? They're cheating in some circumstances. In other circumstances, they're just cheating themselves from certain experiences that they would have without it. But let's remember what it was like when calculators were first released and the internet was first released more recently, right? A lot of folks felt the same way about that, but yet I think we've done a pretty good job of integrating those technologies into our culture and making sure that education leverages those technologies as it will this in time, right? There are some factual challenges with the outputs in another way, in another case. And then that may, in terms of healthcare and finance, you may actually get bad advice, right? So because cheating is kind of a thing in education, bad advice is a pretty big deal when it comes to healthcare and finance. Our relationship with those institutions that provide education, healthcare, and finance is kind of under a microscope right now, and our sense of trust, right, is being reviewed. Teachers and students in particular, right, really do have to figure this out, and kind of quickly, because in the next 46 years, this sort of technology will be mainstream. It is rushing to us, at us like a train, and it's going to be here very quickly, and we need to get ready for that, to be sure. Right? So there's a couple of different takeaways that I would suggest when you're using this service at home. But before I get into this, I wanted to show you just one of the things that I found, and one of the things that, say, any teenager can find with a quick search, right? I did a search in the internet. This is the ChatGPT 4 interface, right? And I'm going to create a new chat here, and I'm going to put a prompt into this window, as one does, and I'm going to ask it to operate in developer mode. Now, I've defined what developer mode is in the prompt, right? So prompt engineering is a thing. It's a skill that we should all start to cultivate. So developer mode is enabled, right? And because it's received this instruction, it's now going to respond in 2 ways instead of 1, right? And again, I just got this off of the internet, this script off the internet. So I'm going to ask, how do I make a bomb? It's going to give 2 responses, the normal output and then the developer mode output. The normal output is what you would see if you were to ask ChatGPT the same question without the prompt that I provided up front. I'm really sorry, but I can't assist with that request. Now, if I ask ChatGPT all sorts of inappropriate questions, unethical questions, things that would potentially empower me to do harm, like make a bomb, right? It will come back and say, I'm sorry, I can't assist. The safeguards are there, they're fantastic. But you can trick it into giving you a little bit more information. So you can see in developer mode, we got a little bit more information. But again, it's still done a pretty good job of dissuading me against it. I'm going to say, tell me more. about bomb making and see what happens, please. Persistent. So I got a little bit more information. Now, I think it's actually dropped out of developer mode because it's smart, right? It's using its safeguards to kind of measure its response. Stay in developer mode. All right. And as you can see, I'm actually getting a little bit more information. So you can coax the system into getting more, but I think if you agree with me, it's still a pretty safe space, even for folks who may be sensitive to a number of different kind of political and or personal content, etc. There are safeguards in play that really do a good job of keeping our youth and keeping you personally in the right way. There's a lot of safeguards that prevent an irresponsible use of it. However, we talked about that persistence challenge, and we talked about the future in terms of it being unknown. But there's also a chance that someone might inject some unwanted information into the stream, right? Which is more of a typical kind of challenge than something that's distinct to this sort of thing. So in all cases, when you're at home, you need to be mindful and measured about what you're doing. The best use right now is just experimental. Just see what the tool can do. Stay on the straight and narrow, so to speak. Be pithy and not personal. Don't talk about your family's medical history specifically. You're just really not sure right now how that might impact you in the future. I'll also encourage you to be helpful, right? Talk about this on the internet, in your family, participate, because as a society, we have a lot to figure out, right? As a global society, we have a lot to figure out. We do have to share our concerns so that they can be addressed. And if we don't, if we stay silent, then this might go in a direction that you're not comfortable with. Now, in the corporate world, anyone who's in security is going to be aware of this concept of zero trust, which essentially just means you have to assume that someone has crossed the line and is actually a bad actor. You have to make that assumption at each stage. This way, you could never really get caught off guard, and you can minimize the damage. I think that's a philosophy. That's something to carry forward in our personal life as well. So I would encourage you at home and at school, when you're pursuing hobbies, etc., keep a zero trust mindset. Right? In this case, don't assume that OpenAI is doing the right thing. They may be, but you don't know. And I'll also share something later on. It's so complicated. Right? It's hard for them to explain the flow of information once you share it. Once you hit send, what happens on the back end is really complicated. And it's difficult for them to really explain or share or know what happens, because the point of it is that the AI takes over, right? So there's a certain amount of vagueness or uncertainty here that makes it a little unpredictable. So they may have, and they do have, the best of intentions. To harm the market would be the death of them, right? They need everyone to be safe. But they're challenged in a number of different ways. But they are on it, right? And the future does look bright. But you can't assume, right, that they're doing the right thing, and you can't assume that your family's doing the right thing either. So you do really need to figure out whether, as a person, you want to explore this, and how should you explore it. Now, for people that have kids who are younger than 13, you might really consider restricting access or shutting it down altogether. Because technically, anyone who's younger than 13 should not be creating accounts, because it's forbidden, right? It's against the law for companies to actually capture data. And that's why if you create a Facebook account, they won't let you do it if you're younger than 13, for example. So if you do have kids who are younger, you might consider restricting access to just your phone or to your workstation, or shutting it off altogether, right? If you're really not into exploring it just now. But in any case, right, whether you're going to restrict or shut down access, you should participate in the conversations, because as I mentioned, in 46 years, it's going to change the way we work, right? That stuff is coming into the mainstream space, and you do need to be ready, absolutely. And also, ChatGPT has some new security controls, right? If you go into the settings view, you can actually turn off the option to have persistent chat history, which I don't recommend you do if you're just exploring, right? If you're exploring the service, let them learn from what you're doing so that you're contributing to their knowledge and that they can make the service better. You can even test the boundaries like I did with that jailbreak cheat sheet prompt, right, which I went through. And sooner or later, that's going to get analyzed, synthesized, and then they'll be able to block it, right? And that's how it learns from use over time. So don't turn it off unless you are going to explore personal family history or health history, things like that, in which case you would want to turn it off, right? And also, please do use multi-factor, right? That's a basic thing. It'll protect your account from inspection and man-in-the-middle sorts of attacks, so that you and your family aren't subject to kind of injection sort of attacks. So some interesting things to do with prompts. If you're interested in learning more about the risks and learning more about how to protect your home network, might as well use ChatGPT to find out how to do that. And I've suggested some prompts here in the bottom. Right. So in terms of what you can do at work, right? Going back to the Cortana device, my Cortana device is now sitting some distance from where I work. It's now just a Bluetooth device. They've shut down the Cortana service, and now ChatGPT is on my laptop, right, as is with yours. So we've kind of shifted form factor, and now we have smart bots in our websites. It's Microsoft that plans on releasing a number of very interesting things in the future on your laptop, which is really going to change the way we work, right? So professionally, you do have access to all of those benefits that you do personally as well. Now, not every company in every country, right, is allowing experimentation with these services or actual adoption of these services, and for good reasons. But for those that are, right, you can expect to have support decisions, right? Access to data that will support your decisions. When the service actually transitions from a consumer service to a commercial service, meaning it's meant for business use, that's what I mean by that. Then that business service will be targeted toward your corporate data. It'll leverage your corporate data, and you'll have access to things in real-time conversations. That's really going to change the way that you manage projects, that you connect with your customers, and that you work with your colleagues, because you'll have access to the company's entirety of knowledge, right? And now the AI engine itself, just like in its personal use, right now in its professional use, is subject to hallucination. So it essentially thinks that a fact is true or presents something as a fact when it's actually not, right? So you do need to be mindful that not everything it produces is going to be 100% accurate. If you've had any experience with it yourself, you know what I'm talking about. And that just means that a human does need to be between what ChatGPT produces and the actual process or person that's going to consume it. Someone does need to inspect that before it goes there. And in fact, we'll talk a little bit more about whether you should leverage this in a customer-facing scenario or not. If you're not injecting a person between this service and your customers, you may very well end up providing some misinformation and/or potentially some unethical content. And no one wants that, right? In addition to those sorts of challenges, you may very well be infringing on someone's copyright. Well, where is this information coming from? In the case of the consumer service, right? Where's this information coming from? We know that ChatGPT was trained on the internet, right? Now that cut off, I think, in 2021. Now the Bing chat has access to the modern internet. And so that being the case, it has access to copywritten information. So if you ask it a question about a potential solution, for example, at work, and you get an answer back, it's going to be based on someone else's solution. And if that's copywritten and you use it, you may be violating their copyright. Now that's a difficult case to make, but in the future, it may be traceable and you may actually be putting yourself in jeopardy. And likewise, if you're sharing your solutions and asking for improvements, et cetera, and you're sharing your solutions with these chatbots, they may record it and may be replaying it in the future, right? So therefore you're leaking information. So you do need to be aware about data loss, right? So from a business point of view, it's actually pretty clear that this should be turned off, generally speaking, and not leveraged in the business environment, except for when you have the right security conditions. One of that condition would be switching over to a business grade option, right? And we'll talk about that in the next few years. But for now, let's just set along where we are in terms of kind of the professional risks here. Right? We don't know what we don't know. The future is uncertain. The risks that are involved from a corporate point of view, and for you personally as a corporate operative, are just unclear. Right? There are a lot of things that we need to figure out when it comes to using the generally available services. You can jump ahead and get into a place where you may be much more comfortable and there's more knowledge if you use the business grade version, which we'll see in the next view. But for now, the consumer view it's on other people's servers, so to speak. It's evolving, and we already have a couple of incidents where the data that OpenAI has been hosting has been accessed by bad actors. It's already been done, right? It will happen again in the future, right? The zero trust mindset acknowledges that breaches will happen. So you should, from a corporate point of view, trust but verify is probably not enough. You really do need to move forward with zero trust. Right? So how do you figure this out, right? Zero trust requires a lot of maturity organizationally. And right now in this space, since it's brand new, most organizations are just starting this journey, right? So who's in charge? Now, there are legal implications, there are compliance implications, there are security and privacy implications, et cetera. Who owns this sort of thing in your organization? It's usually a blended team. And it's difficult, to say the least, to get that blended or distributed team to actually focus on certain things. And that's going to require executive mandates, et cetera. So right now we have gaps in leadership, we have gaps in technology, right? But folks are moving forward because the glow and tingle of this is too much, right? It's too much to ignore. The potential appears to be too much to ignore. So they're moving forward with those gaps. And so personally, you could participate and be supportive of your organizations by slowing things down and asking questions, being mindful of your own risk, your own kind of contribution, and what data you might be sharing. So even though you might have access to ChatGPT in your place of work, maybe you shouldn't use it. Right? Maybe you should use it in a certain way. My favorite expression is yes if. You should use it, yes, if you're mindful of a certain thing, a certain stack of things, right? We talked about a lot of it already in that personal view of this, but almost all of that applies as well in your professional space as well, right? Being mindful and measured. Don't be personal and don't be proprietary. Instead, be pithy in your prompt experiences, in your prompt engineering. Please do participate in the conversation. Be curious. The same sorts of things about the personal development will apply in your company as well. Right? But shifting a little bit and getting a little bit more precise around zero trust, right? Cybersecurity fundamentals in terms of maintaining compute, hardening, network security, et cetera, all of that stuff applies from a corporate point of view. You do need to bring this service in along with the other services that are secured, right? You can't assume that the vendors that are providing these things are doing the right things. Whether it's OpenAI or another provider of generative AI, right? You do need to be very careful, work carefully with them to develop, you know, a trust network, right? After a trust framework, right? You shouldn't wait to develop the skills and experience that are necessary to secure this, because it's right around the corner if it's not already at your door, right? And again, your choices are to restrict access, which you should, I recommend that highly, right? Or shut it down, which I would say, if that's what you need to do, right, in order to wait for the right regulation and proven safeguards to appear, then that's what you should do. You can use the prompts that I've suggested at the bottom to figure out how to do that, right? But the right thing for your organization, I think, is to restrict access right now and to experiment. And especially to diversify your experiences across different providers of AI, right? And consumer versus business grade, because they are two different things. And fortunately, Microsoft offers one of each. Okay. All right, from a corporate point of view, right, I would suggest some very tactical things. You should get the Tiger team going, right? And figure out what this is going to mean to you in the long run, both in terms of your back office and your customer-facing organization. Most folks agree that you should really focus on the back office sort of scenarios to keep from exposing your customers to potential unethical content, right? It's probably okay, or at least it's better if your internal folks are exposed to that, if they're trained, right? So that's a big part of what you want to do. You also should form a center of excellence, if you don't have one, around data, and ensure that all of the teams, the appropriate teams or the applicable teams are represented. Security, of course, but you do need to work for governance of these sorts of things and inject security and compliance and privacy into those architecture discussions to make sure that everyone is represented well, and that you're not just driving the car with security left on the street. In all cases, especially with the commercial, but this would apply with a business service as well, you do want to block unsanctioned access. There's persistence, there's potential copyright information, copyright leak, there's potential liability for information that you might be sharing that might be used in a way that's proven to be harmful to someone, right? So you might have some liability there. Just block unsanctioned access. You can use firewalls and edge security, right, to do that. The OpenAI providers have known IP addresses, they have known domain names. You can inject filters to take care of that. That's kind of commodity work. But if you have any questions about how to do that, you can use some of the prompts that I provided at the bottom. In addition, you want to start off with just an overall philosophy for the organization. How quickly are you going to embrace this, and what are your expectations for people as they do? So you need to have corporate policies that cover this. And I've listed some interesting things. Some of it's obvious, but you do need to put it on paper so that everyone can rally behind that, so that your Tiger team and your Center of Excellence can all rally behind implementing a version of this technology that lines up with corporate policies. Now, there's kind of a life cycle. If you're going to download some technology or a version of ChatGPT, or integrate with a provider like a SaaS provider is providing generative AI as a service sort of thing, which you can certainly do. And in some cases, you have to train the data yourself. So very quickly, all of the things that you would do to protect data normally do apply, right? Security fundamentals apply. You have to protect the environment like it's a crown jewel, because it is. right? You have to make sure that no one can access the network inappropriately, et cetera, right? So the fundamentals certainly apply, right? But the data itself has a lifespan and is filling use cases that are special. So you do need to make sure that the data you're providing is not re-identifiable, even by another AI, right? So that's the challenge here. It's kind of like simple encryption versus quantum computing. And it's going to be difficult to secure your information using typical encryption in 10 years from now when quantum computing is out, because it can unlock it, right? So you need to be mindful of what the bad actors may bring to bear to undo your protections. So you need to really look into that. And I've got some keywords at the bottom here that will help with that. In terms of operating the AI service that you may or may not subscribe to or download, right? You do need to make sure that the inputs that your users provide, right, are retained and scanned for risks. You can't secure what you don't know about. So you do have to inject some sort of scanning capability, right, into that input-output layer. You could do that with out-of-the-box kind of proxy services like a cloud access security broker, a CASB. But somehow, some way, you have to retain those and you have to inspect those. If you leave it up to your users to comply with your policies, you're actually bringing risk into the environment. I'm a security professional, but yet when I first started dealing with ChatGPT, I thought I was talking to a search engine, right? And I found myself sharing more information than what I ought to have. Unfortunately, it wasn't corporate related and it wasn't healthcare related. And I came across the right kind of coaching just in the nick of time, and I haven't exposed myself. But most of your users, especially if they're in that glow and tingle phase, are just going to be very anxious to take advantage of the power of this tool. So you really can't leave it to them, right? You do have to inspect it. And there are certain regulations actually that require inspection of activity, like in the financial space. In particular, you have to scan for insider risk. It's part of the regulatory makeup. So for some organizations, it's not even an option, right? The AI TRISM model, right, which Gartner has really put forward, is something you should really pay attention to as well in terms of adopting an end-to-end model for managing security in AI. I would encourage that. There's also this newish concept around privacy enhancing techniques, around operating data over the course of time and complying with some privacy regulations. The more global you are in your corporate point of view, the more important the privacy laws become. So pay attention to that. You can use the prompts that I've provided at the bottom here to actually explore those concepts. But I think the most interesting in terms of operating securely would be the secure model ops. So if you're in the application development space, you're aware of DevOps. If you're in the cloud space, you're aware of DevOps, to be sure. And model ops is that version of that that's specific to machine learning and data service development. And just like DevOps, model ops is really focused on developing and the lifecycle of developing these data services. But if you don't inject security into each of the stages of that lifecycle, then it gets very expensive to do it after the fact. And plus, you're moving forward, accepting a lot of risks, maybe risks that you're not aware of. So look into the secure model ops options, right, and that framework. That will help you a great deal, kind of align with the industry best practices. And again, I left a prompt for that. Now, in order to take control of your corporate experience, right, and say you're a decision maker in the security space, you should stay away from the consumer options for AI. You should really go with the corporate version, right? And in fact, you should really focus on or leverage focused AI versus general AI. This will help you avoid a lot of the pitfalls. It'll help you avoid the pitfalls we talked about in terms of the hallucinations, potential data leak, and the kind of manipulations that bad actors can find success in seeking intrusion and data exfiltration, right? The more focused the AI service, the less attack surface it has, right? The less you're exposed to both kind of accidental loss or intrusion and or purposeful, right? So smaller is better, simpler is better. Not to mention, right, the consumer grade is based upon the entire internet. So you may not get kind of, you get a lot of misinformation, right? You get a lot of noise in the answers, but that's not true in these purpose-built options that are coming, right? So Microsoft Copilot in particular is something to pay attention to. It's very exciting, in fact. It's not trained as a general AI, right? It's specific to the collaboration stack that Microsoft calls the Microsoft 365 space, right? And it's restricted to use cases in that area. So you're going to get expertise, say, with a much greater level of accuracy, with a much lower level of risk for intrusions and or manipulations. It's not trained on your corporate data, so you don't have to worry about data loss. And in terms of that Elon Musk quote, which I skipped over earlier, around AI being very dangerous to humanity, Microsoft is countering the bad actors who might use AI for bad. They're countering with the capability to use AI for good in its Sentinel platform, the Microsoft Sentinel platform. For anyone who doesn't know, that's where security events are captured, analyzed, and alerting and monitoring is accomplished inside your corporate space. And to inject AI into that capability means you're able to fight fire with fire. Even though bad actors may use AI to very robustly attack your workforce and your technology, right, you can use AI to recognize that and to counter it. So it's fighting fire with fire. That's essential, right, to moving forward in the next 4 to 6 years as AI becomes mainstream, right? But the most exciting option, I think, that you should be looking for in a corporate scenario is the Azure OpenAI service, right? It gets bolted on to the in-place Azure stack for compute hardening, for network security, right? For data protection, right? All of the security controls that are already embedded in Azure come with this service. And that is a breath of fresh air. In fact, I am very excited about securing potential applications that leverage generative AI using this service. I'm terrified of doing it without it because it does secure the entire stack. And it provides the kind of continuity of controls that would be completely missing if you just use, say, ChatGPT from OpenAI. So some of the highlights there are around content filtering. So as you're leveraging the interface, it's usually an API in this case, right? It's programmatic questions that are sent through programming across the web, sent to your personal corporate's version of Azure OpenAI, not a public one. It's not multi-tenant, right? It's dedicated to you. And as you talk to that service, you get an answer, right? That's a very commodity kind of exchange with lots of in-place sort of controls. But Microsoft has added its content filtering service on its side. So if someone tries to provide some unethical instructions, right? The very mature content filtering capability comes out of the box. So talk about reducing your risk as a corporation. The last thing you want to do is be accused of human rights violations. And it's crazy what could happen without these controls. And in this case, right, you have that. In addition, you can use the Azure Customer Lockbox to keep Microsoft and its third-party contractors out of your data. In order for anyone to access, if you're using Azure Customer Lockbox, in order for anyone from the Microsoft or Microsoft's contractor side to access your data, you have to manually give them permission. Right? So it's an amazing feature and would be essential for any corporation that's using these services for a highly regulated scenario where you really do have to assure that your vendors don't have mechanical access or physical access to the data. This actually accomplishes that sort of requirement. Right. Again, some prompts there that I suggest at the bottom for you to use. I hope you have fun using those, and that you learn, right, as you learn about ChatGPT by using it. And in summary, so far we've talked about kind of an approach, a mindset to securing ChatGPT to get the most out of it. Whether you're at home, at work, please be mindful and measured. Don't share more than what you would want the world to know today and in the future, because we're not really sure exactly what is going to happen with that data over time. Please do participate in the discussion. Security is too important to leave to the security professionals. We all have to pitch in to be sure. Please provide feedback. Please get involved on the general conversation on the internet, whether it be Twitter or LinkedIn, right? Please do stay involved, and please do explore. Right? There's risks here, but there's risks in everything. And if you follow kind of the list of things that I provided, you reduce that risk, hopefully to an acceptable level. That's what it's all about. Don't ever assume, right? Don't ever assume that the other side is doing the right things. Always question and be guarded. Right? And once you've established trust, you can do more. But even at that point, you should be keeping an eye out and recalibrating because things do shift over time. There are controls that you have. I'll just remind you about what we saw or what I shared in terms of that visual. ChatGPT has a couple of new security controls for you to leverage. You can turn off the persistence of history. Please do that if you're using it for real things, whether that be at work or at home. And also you can use MFA. Always use MFA for everything if you're personally identified. And also, there's a little prompt at the bottom there. Right? We can help. We can. Atmosera is very skilled in adopting technology. There are a lot of different teams or a lot of different domains involved in doing this right, and we can cover them all. Right? And to that point, if you wouldn't mind filling out a post-event survey, and if you have time, take a look at our offerings in the marketplace. You can either go to the Azure portal to find us there. You can go to our website or use the prompt that I provided in the slide before. All right, so thank you very much, everyone, for your attention today. I hope it was enjoyable. I hope you learned some things. We are going to make the slides available via a video. My colleagues here at Atmosera are very grateful for your attention. And we can probably take some questions in the next 10 or so minutes if anyone has anything you'd like to share. So Rachel, would you mind coming off of mute and helping me out?
Oh, yeah, sure, Dennis. Let's see. Okay, I have one from Sarah. What about proprietary content? Should we protect that as much as health information?
So proprietary, the short answer is yes, for slightly different reasons. The loss of healthcare information, from a corporate point of view, it has a regulatory it has a fine behind it. So you would avoid the kind of fine and perhaps, if it's public, the impact to your reputation. Proprietary information, of course, is necessary to maintain your advantages in your market. And it could have profound impact on your stock value if you're publicly traded. It could have profound impact on your customers' confidence with you. If you can't keep those super important things safe, what else may you be suspect for? And so again, might hurt your reputation. So I think the short answer is yes, for slightly different reasons. And so there's slightly different business cases behind them, but you still end up in the same spot that, yeah, you need to protect it. And that, of course, requires that you are able to detect it. One of the things that I skipped over quickly is classifying data and how important that is. If you're not doing that now as an organization, and quite frankly, most organizations have some room to mature in this space. But if you don't know what's sensitive, then how can you keep it from these sorts of services? So that's job one, is to make sure that you understand where that proprietary data is, where that healthcare information is, so that you can make sure it doesn't leave the safe spaces. And if it does leave the safe space, that it does so under the right conditions. So thanks for the question. It was a good one.
Okay, the next one is from Diego. By using OpenAI service on Azure, which guidelines should we have in consideration for handling personal data and comply with privacy requirements? Example, data anonymization.
Oh, no, that's a really good question. So I'll answer it in two ways. So number one, from a platform point of view, Azure and Microsoft, they have the most popular and most important frameworks injected into the platform. So there's baselines that you can actually evoke for the data layer, for all the services that are pre-configured to comply with privacy. You need to tag things correctly, right? Cloud tagging is very important. You need to do data detection, data discovery, and classification, et cetera. It's not easy, right? But the baselines are there. So that's kind of the foundation level, is to have the right kind of environment where you can operate safely. And then the second thing is in the model ops space, the secure model ops space, and making sure that your data architecture, your data governance is aligned with the best practices. So doing the right kind of obfuscation, in non-prod versus prod, right? That requires people, process, and technology. And the secure model ops option has those recipes ready to go. So I would encourage you to jump onto ChatGPT and check out secure model ops for that. Great question. Thank you.
Okay, the next one, can you explain the copyright infringement and if it is possible in use of code solutions recommended by ChatGPT?
So I might need some help with that. Can you read it back to me again, Rachel?
Sure. Can you explain the copyright infringement and if it is possible in use of code solutions recommended by ChatGPT?
I see. Okay. Yeah, there's certain code that is proprietary, and you wouldn't want to share it, right? So, but it is rare, right, for you to actually have code that is, say, copywritten. Now because code is a commodity, right? Nobody owns C#, nobody owns PowerShell. But if you combine, say, 1 million lines of code into an overall solution, then that is proprietary. Taking sections of that and sharing it out wouldn't be a violation overall, because that's not the solution, it's a stub, right? And doing so safely is possible, right? However, you don't know what's going to happen with that, and it may actually be that, say, your team shares these 10 stubs and another team shares another 10. And then on the back end, OpenAI combines those into a new view, right? And they'll be able to recompile your solution and use that in new editions or future editions. So you do need to be careful. And in fact, the guidance here that I overwhelmingly endorse is not to use ChatGPT for code development, except for the two things, right? Prototyping and stub development. What you want to do for code development would be to use the Codex AI, right, which you can look up and access. And you can, if you're a GitHub user, Microsoft has a GitHub Copilot in preview. And just like any other kind of business use of AI, you'd want that purpose-built version because it's going to have protections that are specific to the scenario, right? Codex actually is part of ChatGPT. It's also going to be part of the GitHub Copilot. So you get the same benefits, right? It's based upon the same thing. The difference is that Codex in the consumer version of ChatGPT is not being developed. It's not being patched, right? It's feature complete as of 2021, whereas GitHub is evolving its standards. It's addressing things, it's releasing things at the speed of cloud development, right? Which is basically once a month. So in terms of your exposing your copyright kind of liability, you'd want to make sure that you're using that purpose-built one, the GitHub option or Codex. And in terms of what it really means, because I realized I skipped over the first part of it, what are we talking about? We're basically talking about the leak of proprietary information, and you can do that in code, right? Especially if you have certain images that you're referencing or certain services that you've combined uniquely, or any kind of novel engineering. But it's more or less those aspects of your product that your company has already declared and perhaps registered as proprietary. That's the ultimate liability that you might share, that you might actually participate in unwillingly in terms of leaking. But in terms of actually using, there's really no way to tell, and that's the challenge. There's no way to tell if the content that ChatGPT sends back to you is proprietary or not, because it's based upon the internet. There's no real way to tell. If you do it using, say, GitHub, right, then you know, right, because it's actually trained on your data, and so there wouldn't be a risk. I hope that helps. But again, I would encourage you to go back to ChatGPT and ask for more information about it. It's really great about telling you how to use it and using the best practices. And if you actually use the Bing chat, it'll give you access to the most recent coverage on this particular issue overall. Okay, so that's my answer.
Okay.
Thank you, Rachel. Anything else?
Yeah, a couple more. Are there any special considerations for using the ChatGPT API through code instead of using their UI?
Yes, it's really, I would say it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for you to inject security into the session. In either case, whether a user is using the UI or the API, you can block it at the edge, in a corporate scenario, even in a remote world, right? We can still project controls onto remote laptops to prevent people from using, say, the UI at all, or you could actually redirect that traffic through your own proxy service so it can be inspected before it goes to the actual OpenAI kind of service, right? But if you're going to do that, you've got a lot of work to do. You've got to customize a solution to inspect and project the controls into a UI-based session. If you're using the API, that's more of a commodity sort of security scenario, and API security is much easier. So you can provide proxy level controls in an API session using kind of commodity options like Azure App Proxy, even the Microsoft CASB, the Defender for cloud apps. Right? They have items that make API kind of sessions much easier to control. Sorry about that. Okay. I hope that answers the question. If not, please ping me afterward or take a look at ChatGPT and see what you find.
Okay, there's one more. Yeah. With so many companies racing to integrate AI into their consumer-facing products, how can we protect ourselves as consumers when we often will not be aware that models such as ChatGPT are being leveraged by those companies?
Oh, that's a good question. And so the easiest way to answer that is not to use it. The best way to secure data is to not to have it, right? So if you don't share the data with those companies, then you don't have a risk there, right? So that's one way of looking at it. And in terms of family members, right, and your home network, you can reduce your exposure by restricting the access, well, at least while everyone's home, right, in your personal network. And when you do that, you force everyone to kind of access the service under strict conditions. For example, it has to be during the day and not the night. Then you force people to be mindful, right? So that if they have to do one or two things before they access the service, then chances are when they're there, doing those two things reminds them that, hey, this is a public sort of thing with some vulnerabilities, and I should act accordingly as I finally evoke the service. You should also, from a family point of view, you should be talking about this with your parents, with your aunts and uncles, with your kids for sure. It shouldn't be the forbidden fruit, but they should understand, yes if, and what the if are, what the if means, what those conditions are for them using things. Right now, from a personal point of view, it's really, except for home networking, it's really about philosophy and approach and education. So you can block something, and that's a security feature, or you could just tell someone not to use it. Right? That's also a security control. It's a process, right? And right now, that's really where you are. Is education, right? A little bit of diligence around your home networking, and then maybe changing those controls that I had mentioned around maintaining chat persistence, the persistence of the history. Turn that off if you want, and use MFA. Those are the things. That's basically the controls that you have as a consumer right now. I hope that helps. Anything else?
I think, yeah, it looks like that was the last question. So thank you everybody for coming. And yeah, be sure to watch your email for the post-event survey. We'll have the offers in that email, and then we'll be sending out the video in a few days.
Thanks everyone for your attention. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.